What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and it's Friday when this video is going up. And with all the kind of hype I'm getting on my channel for Pioneer stuff, I figured I would do a Pioneer video. And after reviewing some decks and really looking at the metagame and stuff like that, I think I'm willing to give my favorite deck for each archetype that is in the Pioneer format. So I'm defining archetype as just the very basic, like aggro slash control slash mid range slash combo, and just giving you the deck that I would choose to play for that given archetype. But before I really get into it and I dive deep into these different decks, make sure to subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell so you know when I post new videos. Pioneer stuff is doing really sweet, so there's gonna be a lot of Pioneer content on the channel. I'm also doing Modern because that's probably easily my favorite format, even if Modern Horizons 2 has kind of ruined it. And be sure to join the Discord that I have linked in the description of this video if you want to discuss Magic or just video games slash other games and stuff in general. Not too shy. Come over and hang out with, me because no one else has joined yet. But with that out of the way, let's dive into it. So first, I have aggro. Aggro to me is like one of the easiest archetypes to play because it's just the natural reaction of players to just play lands, play dudes, turn them sideways. Now, I could have went with the mono red deck. Mono red does reward you for some familiarity, and you could also just be super aggressive and easy to win games that like most aggro decks probably lose in other certain matchups. But with the meta and how it's currently shaped up, I actually went with Boros aggro with an honorable mention going to Mono Blue Spirits. Really quickly, Mono Blue Spirits is definitely fits more of the tempo strategy. I would like consider that more of a control, but it does play a lot like an aggro deck. But I just think the Boros aggro deck is a lot friendlier to new players, while also just being super explosive and having like a higher floor than like the Mono Blue Spirits deck. And I feel like of the two decks, like you really don't want to get behind with either of them, like any aggro deck. But I think the Boros aggro deck can kind of win a game out of nowhere, where the mono blue deck kind of has to get the ball rolling first. So the reasons why I like the Boros aggro deck, other than like the things I just mentioned when comparing it to the mono blue spirits deck, it does well against mono blue and it does well against mono green, which I think are two archetypes that are heavily played in the format currently. Mono green, especially since it probably is just one of the best decks and probably one of the more consistent decks in the format. And Boros Aggro just has a good matchup against it. It can get to the board and really force them to have some really good hands to try to beat them. Also, on top of that, too, while mono blue, you sometimes just kind of go all in on one creature and you try to play like this tempo-y style deck. The Boros aggro deck can go wide, but you can also just narrow in on one creature as well. You definitely have the options based on starting hands, what your opponent's trying to do, and things like that. It doesn't really play well against like removal based decks because you are playing like a decent amount of pump spells, and your removal spells require you to like have creatures in play and all that fun stuff. But you are able to play through like one or two removal effects with this deck, so I definitely like it a little bit more than mono blue in that regard. And I believe I've said it at least a few times probably, but I think this deck is easy for new players to pick up and can reward just even after like a few reps. You such as the itch of just playing creatures, turning them sideways, and then just playing pump spells and trying to kill your opponent as fast as possible. So I think the Boros aggro deck mixes amount of fun along with consistency and winning games, which of course is always fun for any player. So now going to control, I think blue white control is probably in the same realm of like mono green is, where like it can be one of the better decks, and it does have a good matchup against Boros aggro, which I again previously stated that I think it's probably one of the best aggro decks that you can play. You could probably put like red black mid range in here, even though red black mid range is considered mid range. I think you could put it more so like on the controlling side. So I think blue white control or like red black mid range as like your control options are totally fine. I think blue white being the best just for the fact that it has two very powerful planeswalkers in Big Teferi and the Wandering Emperor, which are just super good and can just obviously keep you in the game and in some cases just bore your opponent to death to where like they just leave. Done. and sometimes that's a lot better than reducing their life to zero or having zero cards in the library. The deck plays a ton of cheap removal spells. You have March of Otherworldly Light, you have Portable Hole, you have like Uncounterable Supreme Verdict, you have Farewell to deal with like a bunch of other permanents, and of course you have like Jawari Disruption, which is essentially a four spike sensor as well. Um, with sensor having the cycle ability and going back to Jawari, you can just play it as a land when it stops being a counter, and it plays some copies of Absorb too, which can build a lot of tempo, especially against like burn decks where like they're expecting to deal 3 damage and you counter their spell and you gain 3 life, and essentially like cost them 2 more cards to get where they were with the 1 card. So to me, that's pretty good. It also gets some sweet tech in the sideboard. You have, I believe it's Hullbreaker, which is like the uncounterable 7 mana, 7/8 dumb thing that's actually like thing in the ice. I don't know, like that's what players are talking about. It also gets Dream Trawler too, which like when Pioneer, like when I was playing Blue White Control and Pioneer, like Dream Trawler was like the way that you won the game. People were playing Elspeth Sun's Champion, and I think I even played like a copy of Elspeth Sun's Champion, but Dream Trawler was just so good. You know, you get to attack, draw cards, gets big, and it has lifelink, and it has like built-in protection just by getting to discard cards to, tap it down and give it hexproof. It by far and away could win like a ton of games just on its own if you were able to protect it. So, yeah, that's my analysis of the blue-white control deck. Definitely a very good option if you want a control deck in the format, and I think blue-white control should continue to see a lot of play as long as like Boros aggro and a lot of the other like aggressive decks, even like mono red, continue to see play, and those decks will continue to see play because people like playing aggro decks. Who knew? Mid range, even though red black mid range definitely has a good argument to be the mid-range deck that I would assume would be the best mid-range deck in the format. I actually put Mono Green Devotion here. I don't see it as much of a combo deck as you're just trying to assemble a critical mass of cards, and I would consider a combo deck just trying to amass like most like 3 cards, 3 or 4 cards. And the Mono Green Devotion deck just kind of has like Karn packages. It has just, the Kiora plus like playing big dudes. Havoc Festival, I believe is what it's called. Probably not. I'm probably wrong on that. But, it's considered the best deck in the format for a reason. It's super consistent. You have to have some pretty good draws to be able to beat it. Even like the Boros aggro deck can put a lot of pressure on it and force it to have an answer or to go big right now. But if it just gets to, then there's very few options the Boros aggro deck, just as an example, can do to beat it after going big and just having big enough creatures to um, stop what the Boros aggro deck is doing. Um, on top of that too, it's very explosive. You honestly have turns where like it's turn 3 turn 4 and they have like 8 mana in play, and it's not like oh, if I have the nut draw I can make this much mana. It's like, no, this is like a normal draw that the deck can have where you just make a ton of mana, you play a big thing, and your opponent super early in the game has to beat it. Mono blue kind of struggles because if you can play like a turn 2 or rather a turn 3 Cavalier of Thorns, they can't attack through it very easily. It's going to take a while, or they're going to have to use other spells to get rid of it, to which you're going to get to play it and get more value, or tax their resources by playing things, and then they have to like counter it on top of having to like bounce it and things like that. So, Mono Green Devotion, a reason why people think it's the best deck in the format. It's just super consistent compared to all the other decks, and the other decks that could match it in consistency can definitely have a hard time matching it in power level. So, Mono Green Devotion gets my nod for the mid-range deck to play in the Pioneer format. And so lastly, we get to combo, and I don't think there's much competition. Again, like with like some semantics, you could put like Mono Green Devotion in like the combo. You could put like Mono Blue in it because 1-drop creature plus the thing to draw cards. That card. Um, is like a combo. But Lotus Field, I think far and away is probably the best and probably like really the only like good combo deck that you can play in the format. And that kind of sucks because I believe it's one of the hardest of three between this and the three other decks that I mentioned, this is definitely the hardest deck to pick up. There's so many different lines with the Sultai Ultimatum that you have to think about. Like what three cards you're going to get. If your opponent puts back this card, what happens after I cast these other two spells? Exactly when to make copies of Lotus Field with your Thespian stage, because your opponent can just blow it up with like a Boseiju or something like that while you're attempting to copy it. So definitely just a few examples of where like you have to kind of pick your spots when you try to go for things. Um, but the deck does reward you for the repetition. It does reward you for finding different lines and figuring out what lines are correct and which ones are not correct, given the context of like the board and like the game state and everything, and like what your matchups are. The deck is also just super satisfying to play, and honestly, like even back when like this was like super powered, you had Underworld Breach and things like that, you felt really smart like when you were able to like find the line and play. And the number of times where I'm like, I don't think I can win, and you just sit there for a few minutes and you're like, oh, so I have to do this and blah 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 whatever. And the deck is still like that, even with not having the way of going infinite with like Underworld Breach. The deck still is very powerful, can go off in a moment's notice, and again, just if you're a very consistent player and you stick to playing this deck, the deck will reward you, and you'll in turn reward yourself by winning some games that maybe when you started you didn't think were possible to win, you know. So those are my four picks for the best decks in each archetype for Pioneer. Do with this information what you will. I would hope that this would be kind of like a good starting point. For like newer players, I think these decks would be nice to pick up just because I think a lot of these decks will kind of stick around. I think like Boros Aggro, like Blue White Control, and like Mono Green Devotion are probably the most safe. I would imagine Lotus Field would be like one of the four to get the axe, but I also think Mono Green Devotion is kind of on the fence of it. But I still think they're all safe because I don't think that they'll necessarily do anything about it within like 6 months. So that's at least a decent amount of time to like go to tournaments if you're interested and play some of these decks that are for some of them bordering on busted and other ones bordering on super consistent and just being very satisfying to play and make you feel like a big brain player. So that's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, leave a like on the video, of course. Comment what deck that you would play out of these four, or if you wouldn't play any of them, or if I just mislabeled them. Whatever. Tell me your feelings in the comments. Of course, subscribe to the channel. Follow the link in a Discord to join the server if you are interested in that sort of stuff. And that's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next one.